This government has got it wrong.
I call Materia Toure.
Thank you, Mr Chair. How dare that minister stand here and say that the state was going to do right by our children with the reforms to SIF alone. You know, we all know that this is a government that has tolerated low wages, that perpetuates low benefits, that keeps families trapped in severe poverty in this country, and that poverty is the greatest risk to our children's well-being in this country. It is the greatest risk. And we have a government who keeps those families in poverty and drives more there. That is what the housing crisis is showing us. So when this minister sits here and says, you know, the state needs to take responsibility for the well-being of New Zealand's children, I wish they would. And the first thing that they could do is to make sure that families have got enough of what they need to live a decent, not flash, a decent life in this country. How dare that minister stand here and say that work is the solution to their poverty? It might have been under a different government. It certainly is not under National. Under National, we have seen increasing numbers of working families driven into the streets, driven out of their homes and into their cars. How many times have we seen, night after night on the television, families whose kids are going to school and doing their best to succeed, whose parents are working full-time jobs, but who do not have the income to afford a decent home in which they can take care of their children? That is what this government has driven our country to. It is intolerable for that minister to stand there and say that she will do better for New Zealand's children and ignore the single greatest threat to their well-being. So housing has become, in the last few years, the key point at which those issues of poverty, those issues of low wages, of family insecurity and instability have made themselves real. We have a government that is failing one of its core responsibilities as a government, and that is to provide a stable housing market with warm, dry and secure housing for every one of the families who live in this country. No society can operate effectively if its citizens are sleeping under bridges, are living in cars, are in substandard housing that causes their kids to get sick. That is a symbol of a failing society, a society being failed by its government. We have a government that is in denial about one of the most fundamental roles that it is required to perform, to make sure its citizens are safely and securely housed. So how did the National Party, let this become the Achilles heel? How did housing become the Achilles heel of National? How did National bring themselves to abandon New Zealand families to the vagaries of a market that is pushing house prices way beyond what an ordinary family can afford? Because abandoned families is what National has done. And they have not just allowed it, actually, they've encouraged it over the last 8 years. The lowest home ownership rate in 65 years under National. The biggest gap between incomes and house prices in decades under National. The highest level of homelessness, well, you can sigh, sir, but your government, the government you are part of, has overseen the highest level of homelessness, some 40,000 New Zealanders, in a generation. Over 8 years, the country has been driven to this, under this National government. We heard quite a bit today about National's supposed comprehensive housing plan. It was, a long list of things that have clearly not worked. We have Auckland house prices at 10 times the median household income, highest rate of homelessness, high rates of child poverty that continue to remain high. At even 6 times or 10 times the household income, we know that the economic risk of this housing bubble is likely to cause more problems for families in the future. So where is the plan to deal with that? We have economists, from the banks, from councils, from consultancies, from the media, all saying there is a serious problem, economic problem coming with housing being so priced out of families' reach. And where is the government plan for managing that? Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair.
Materia to right.
Where is the government plan for managing that? They have overseen, National has overseen, the biggest increase in house prices in decades. They can have no concept of when that is going to end, when those house price rises are going to end. And people are warning of a crash. A crash in the housing market is totally unacceptable. The harm that that will cause to families and to the economy is totally unacceptable. So where is the plan from the government to protect New Zealanders, to protect our economy and to make sure our families have access to a fundamental human right, which is warm, dry and secure housing? How could this government let this country get to this point? The only way that we can protect New Zealand families is to make sure that there is a plan to both increase incomes and to bring house prices down so that there is a soft landing in time. That is the hard truth. It is a hard truth. Nobody likes to say it, but it is the truth. And unfortunately, this government will not address even the fact that there's a housing crisis, let alone the reality that in order to be a responsible government, you have to have a plan for managing that so that families don't get hurt. It's not a big ask, actually, of New Zealanders to ask the government to manage the housing crisis in a way that will protect them. How has that gotten so complicated? How has that gotten so ideological by National that they can't even make sure that New Zealand families are warmly, safely and securely housed? So the plan doesn't have to be complicated. New Zealanders will accept that it will take some time. We're talking 10, 15 years. People know that these kinds of policies need time to come into play. But what they cannot see, and understandably so, is that this government will take their family issues seriously. They're concerned for their kids not being able to buy a home. They're concerned that their grandkids will not have warm, secure and stable housing for them to grow up in. These are the real concerns of New Zealanders every day, and they look to government for some leadership and they see nothing. Look, blank faces. They see nothing from National because National has nothing to offer because they have deliberately created this mess. I mean, was that the point of the comprehensive housing plan, National, to actually drive us into the worst housing crisis we have seen in a generation? Was that the point of your plan? Because that is what has happened. And the National Party members aren't the ones who are going to be suffering for it, right? It's ordinary New Zealand families, it's the working poor who are living in their cars, it is people on benefits who are continually harassed by this government because of their poverty. They are the ones who are suffering every day. This is why we need a change of government, sir. This is the only option that we have got. A change of government is what will turn this around. We'll provide a plan, thank you. We'll provide a genuine plan to protect families, to raise incomes, to provide housing affordability for New Zealanders, to reduce and then eliminate child poverty from this country. Only a change of government will deliver on that. Because as we've seen, National had their go, they have failed us, they have failed families, they have failed our kids. And they have nothing new to offer. We saw that today. Even after 4 weeks away, they still had nothing new to offer. And in fact, National just recycling Labour and Greens policy, as we saw with the tax holiday, the dividend holiday for Housing New Zealand. Mr. Chair, housing should not have been such a hotly contested political issue because there should be consistent approaches across parties around housing because it is so fundamental to New Zealanders, to families' well-being. It has become a hot political issue because National's ideology is driving families into their cars and onto the streets. That makes them fundamentally irresponsible and incapable of governing for the benefit of the country as a whole. And so the sooner they go, the better. The sooner we get a change of government, the better. New Zealand families deserve better. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chair.
Meka Waitiri.